Thank you, Edward. Today I'm going to describe the political and economic fundamentals of Hong Kong's property market, but I'm also going to review numbers for typical home purchase and describe what your dollar buys in different parts of the city. And then I'll share some techniques for researching a purchase and avoiding common pitfalls like unauthorized building works. I'll wrap up with a quick look at the unique situation that exists in the new territories. But before I do any of that, I'm going to answer two questions that are at the top of everybody's mind in this room. I absolutely guarantee it. And the first one is the property market going to go up further, or is it going to go down? More than a century ago, somebody asked the legendary American financier J.P. Morgan a similar question about the American stock market, and he replied, "It will fluctuate." As with the stock market, no one here knows what direction the property market is going to go, up or down. And frankly, anybody who tells you that they do is either a charlatan or they're talking their own book. Having said that, Hong Kong residential property is the most expensive on earth, according to recent research released by CBRE in October 2015. It's also near or at the top of its historic range. In October 2015, UBS said Hong Kong was second only to London in terms of being at risk of being in a bubble. And The Economist claimed that Hong Kong residential real estate was 89% overvalued in relation to rents. Finally, as you probably know, the Hong Kong government has a target of 86,000 new flats to be built within the next 3 to 4 years. So that's the case for the market correcting downward. But there's a little bit more to the story than that. Despite recent hiccups, Hong Kong continues to benefit from the economic miracle that's unfolding to our north. While growth has slowed, China's government has lifted more people out of poverty than any administration in history. And while there's no way that China is going to turn the clock back to 1949. Furthermore, we're in an unprecedented 7th year of zero interest rates, and in October 2015, the president of the Minneapolis Fed suggested that the United States should consider negative interest rates. In short, we're in unprecedented, uncharted economic territory where historical models have less utility than they have had in the past. And that brings us to the second question. Should I buy a home in Hong Kong? And the answer to that is a very definite maybe. There's a lot about the home buying process, like the direction of interest rates and the intricacies of the Hong Kong government's land policies, that you and I really don't know a lot about. But there are things that you do know about, and one of those things is your personal life situation. And that's where I recommend you start if you're thinking about buying a home in Hong Kong. You need to conduct what I call a personal inventory. So for example, how do you feel about Hong Kong? Is it your home, or is it a place that you barely tolerate? How does your family feel about it? How long do you plan on living here? Does Hong Kong meet your needs? For example, do you have an asthmatic child in the house, or a student radical for that matter, or somebody with special education or physical needs that Hong Kong doesn't always really take good care of? Can you find a suitable home for your lifestyle? Is your family shrinking or growing? Do you plan, like some of us, in retiring in Hong Kong and aging in place? And what about pets or hobbies like sailing, for example? And now the real nut of the matter. How secure is your job, and how secure is your income? Do you work for a multinational company that could wake up tomorrow morning and say, "Richard, we need you in London or in Zurich"? And if that happened, could you afford to maintain a house in Hong Kong? Those are the sorts of things you really need to address before you start talking about floor plans, color schemes, mortgage rates, or anything else. You might reach the end of those questions and decide to rent instead, and that's quite okay. But if you do decide to buy, you really need to understand the political and economic forces that shape our property market. Hong Kong is unique. It's a densely populated city of 7.2 million souls, jammed into 1,100 square kilometers, and only 7% of the city's land is actually used for housing. You know that we're the capital of the Pearl River Delta, which the World Bank recently called the world's largest urban area. But the boundary between Hong Kong and China and our government's policies keep property prices here artificially high. Second, with the exception of the land underneath this picture, the Hong Kong government owns all of the city's land. And much of our housing and development policy is concocted and executed behind closed doors. Our government has a real passion for mega projects such as the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge and new rail lines. In his 2015 policy address, Hong Kong's chief executive announced plans for the East Lantau metropolis, a development that would reclaim 1,000 hectares of land in the sea off of Pak Phulang. Hong Kong is in an enviable position in that we're rich, so we don't have trouble paying for these projects, but those projects can have a huge impact on property values and on your ability to enjoy your home. Third, the Hong Kong government is perpetually caught trying to balance two conflicting goals. On the one hand, it has to provide affordable land for the city's residents, 45% of whom live in subsidized housing of one sort or another. On the other hand, government must support property prices to protect homeowners, investors, banks, and developers. A large drop that the government actually caused in property values here would inflame the middle class and send them out into the streets. It would also have devastating impact on our economy. National policies are another issue. As you know, in 1997, Hong Kong became a special administrative region of China. And the Basic Law, which is our mini constitution, guarantees Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy until 2047. But what happens after 2047 is an open question. And that question is going to become much more topical in 2017 when 30-year mortgages start spanning the end of the one country, two systems era. In the near term, some people, including politicians, students, and the protesters who occupied Central in 2014, are deeply concerned about China's growing influence over the day-to-day life of people in Hong Kong. People from the mainland have bought a lot of property here, and they support the high prices that we enjoy here. We enjoy being, if you are a landowner, that is, or a property owner. But as casino operators in Macau can tell you, when flows of hot money stop, the business environment can chill very rapidly. Finally, the Hong Kong dollar has been pegged to the US dollar since 1983. And that peg has withstood intense pressure during the Asian and global financial crises of 1997 and 1998, and 2008 and 2009. But there have been repeated calls from academics, from bankers, and from politicians to scrap the peg. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong government issues regular statements saying that the peg is going nowhere. It's here for the long term. But anything is possible, particularly in a world where the US dollar is losing its reserve currency status. It's worth noting that in the decade before we pegged to the US dollar, the Hong Kong dollar was in free float against the US dollar, and it ranged from just a little bit less than 5 to the US dollar to a peak of 9.6. So you can imagine what that sort of volatility would do to the Hong Kong property market. One side effect of the dollar peg is that our interest rates are set in Washington. And despite talk of negative interest rates, many market watchers expect quantitative easing to end and interest rates to begin to rise. And that's particularly true after Friday's job numbers. The word on the street now is that it looks very much like rates will start creeping up in December. That, of course, will make mortgages more expensive, and it may very well cool Hong Kong's economy further. So if you're comfortable with all of that, the personal inventory and the economic and political environment, and you want to buy property, where do you start? Well, the first question you need to ask is, do I have the financial resources to actually buy a home here? So here's a sample purchase that assumes that you're not a permanent resident and that you're going to buy a $20 million home. You'll need to have a down payment of at least $10 million, which is 50%, and you're going to pay stamp duty of $1.5 million and buyer's stamp duty of a further $3 million. You're going to pay your real estate agent 1% commission, legal fees of about 20,000 Hong Kong dollars, and I think it's probably sensible, if you're buying a pre-owned home, to consider the cost of renovations. So you add another $1.5 million there, but really with a renovation, the sky's the limit. If you want gold-plated taps, that's going to cost you a lot more. Don't forget contingencies, moving expenses, furniture, and all of the other little bits and pieces you're going to need to fit out your new home. With that $10 million mortgage on a 25-year repayment schedule at 2.15%, which is about the going rate, your monthly payments can be about $43,000. Property taxes, or rates as they're known here, is going to be about $2,500. Utilities, management fees of about $4,000. Utilities, $1,500. Insurance, $300. So you're looking at just a little bit more than $51,000 a month as a monthly payment. If you're comfortable with those numbers, consider the effects of an interest rate hike. As you can see there, if we got up to 5.15%, you're going to be paying $60,000 a month in interest or in mortgage repayments. You should also consider the possibility of a market correction. As Ed mentioned, I've lived here for a long time, including during the financial crisis in 1997, when home prices fell 50% from their peak. And then they remained in the doldrums right through 2003 when we were hit by SARS, which killed 3,000 people here. So a downturn is certainly not impossible. If those numbers still make sense, consider how long you're going to be in Hong Kong. If you sell within 3 years of buying a property, you're going to be hit with a 10 to 20% tax on that. So you want to hold on for, I think, I wouldn't buy anything unless I was going to be here for at least 5 years, and I think 10 years would be even better, just in terms of having that time for a market to recover from any sort of a correction. Next, where and what do you want to buy? One of the great things about Hong Kong is we've got a wide variety of options. For example, with our hypothetical $20 million, you could buy a 1,300 square foot apartment in Greenery Gardens, which is the building on the right, which is a 22-year-old building in Pak Phalang, which, as you can see, overlooks a cemetery, which is definitely a drawback here among local buyers. That same 20 million Hong Kong dollars, or about 2.6 million US, will buy you anything from 500 square feet to 1,700 square feet, ranging from new to 57 years, which in the US or in Europe, 57 years is not really a big deal. In Hong Kong, it's considered to be ancient. And it will buy you anything from an apartment to a detached villa in the New Territories, like this one. So these examples were all grabbed from, of asking prices, were all pulled from real estate agent sites in June 2015. And while prices have undoubtedly shifted up and down, the relationship between prices of things in the central business district versus further out, between apartments and houses, remains fairly constant. Specifically, old is less interesting than new. Low floors are cheaper than high floors. Noise and air quality and aesthetics are really the driver behind that. A convenient location and access to transportation are always really powerful. And schools are another important driver. Along with the exception of luxury properties on the peak, anything that's far away from the central business district suffers from a penalty in terms of valuation. And office prices and commercial and residential rents tend to follow the same pattern. Don't forget the health implications of your purchase. Research has shown one of the best ways to improve your quality of life is to shorten your commute. Meanwhile, living in an environment that's noisy or with bad air pollution can increase your chance of cardiovascular disease, respiratory infection, diabetes, and other conditions. Being surrounded by parks and other greenery, on the other hand, has got a lot of benefits, physically and psychologically. A recent study published in the journal Landscape and Urban Planning found that residents of tree-lined streets in London were prescribed fewer antidepressants than members of a control group. So with that in mind, you can start researching your new home. And one of the best ways to do that is to rent a unit in the neighborhood, or better yet, rent a unit in the building where you're thinking of buying. I've done this twice, once with an office in Sai Ying Pun and once with an apartment in Pak Phalang. And that's how you discover how the daily commute really works when you're coming back from drinks at Lan Kwai Fong at 12:30 and how convenient that is. You discover if you like the restaurants in the neighborhood, whether the building security guards are actually paying attention and are attentive, whether the neighborhood suits your tastes, and whether or not, very importantly, the local grocery store stocks your favorite brand of toothpaste. It's also a good idea to walk through the neighborhood at different times of the day and night and on weekends. Regular strolls reveal a lot about the area and the people who live there. For example, is the area being redeveloped? Are young families moving in, or are there a lot of elderly residents? Are new businesses opening? Is the area gentrifying, with hardware stores and garages being replaced by trendy boutiques and bistros like we're seeing now in places like Western and Kennedy Town? We're seeing a wholesale change in the character of the neighborhood. You can also search the internet and the media to learn about problems in the development. For example, several units in this building here on the south side near Aberdeen have been hit by what's known as glass cancer, where defects in the glass cladding causes the glass panels to actually pop out and shatter on the street below. High-profile violent crimes can taint an entire building and depress rents and prices. And Square Foot magazine, among others, maintains a list of buildings like Hong Kong Parkview, where murders and suicides have happened. Some complexes, like Parkview, have their own websites and even a Wikipedia page. So there's lots of areas where you can do research to find out if you're buying a problem spot. Friends, relatives, and coworkers can be helpful, as can community forums and blogs. You may not get definitive answers. You may just get rumors from these sources, but you can chase those rumors down. And if you're going to spend $20 million, it's worth doing a little bit of research. One of the biggest pitfalls that you can face when buying a pre-owned home is unauthorized building works. So in 2010, the government introduced the Minor Works Control System, which is a registration system for contractors providing small renovation projects and performing them. Until this program was introduced, contractors often modified homes in ways that were unsafe or that did not receive prior approval from the buildings department. As you can see, bamboo is still very common here as well. In addition to licensing contractors, the Minor Works Control System sets out procedures for having projects authorized and lists penalties of up to $400,000 and 2 years in jail for people who build or, importantly, hire somebody else to build an illegal structure. So they will come after the builder, but they will also come after you as the homeowner if you start this project off. And despite this new system, in 2011, the government estimated that there was still some 400,000 illegal structures in Hong Kong, many of those in the new territories. Unauthorized building works create several problems for buyers. First, pre-owned homes are usually sold on an as-is basis here. And if the buildings department knows that a home has got an illegal structure on it, it will issue what's called a statutory order, which is lodged with the lands registry. Your solicitor should do a search of this when she investigates the property for you. And an outstanding statutory order can make it difficult to get a mortgage or to sell a property later on. Illegal structures that involve common areas of a property, like a rooftop, for example, can be particularly problematic to sort out. Second, your new home could include an undocumented illegal structure. For example, judging by the neighboring apartments, the closed-in balcony and the awning shown in red here are very likely to be illegal structures. And if you own one of those apartments, you could receive a note from the government saying that you had 30 days to rectify it, to return it to its original condition. And that modification could just be illegal, or it could be dangerous, or it could be both. Incidentally, as a landowner or property owner, you should know that the government, in the form of the buildings department, has the legal power to make changes to your apartment and then bill you for them later on, and while adding a surcharge. So this can really become a major problem, and it's something that's worth investigating. Sometimes violations are easy to spot, but others are not. For example, here are before and after shots of a balcony. The one on the right is actually illegal. The one on the left is in full compliance, despite the fact that the one on the right has got a steel safety rail on the top of the glass. The difference between the two is about $140,000 worth of repairs. If you're concerned that there may be an unauthorized building works in your home, a home that you're thinking of buying, you can check the building plans with the architectural department. They have a service where you can do this online, and you can go in and actually look at the plans. For most people, a more practical solution is actually to hire a professional like an architect or an engineer to come and have a look. Dangerous slopes on your property can also result in large repair bills. And you may not realize it, but you can actually be held responsible for fixing slopes on land that's not on your property. That will be actually registered with the lands department, but something on a piece of adjacent property can become your problem. And these can be very, very expensive to fix. So I'll wrap up with a few words about life in the new territories, where the air can be cleaner and property prices lower than in Kowloon and on Hong Kong Island. Life in the new territories is more rural than in other parts of Hong Kong, but there are other very important differences. In some villages, like Wing Hing Wai, poor urban planning has left streets so narrow that emergency vehicles cannot reach all of the homes. And 2 young boys burned to death in a fire because they could not be reached by an ambulance a couple of years ago. Or the fire department, I should say. In others, like Siu Hang Hao, access roads are in private hands, and that forces homeowners to pay a quote-unquote maintenance fee to use the only road that allows them to reach their houses. So as a result, a fresh survey and expert legal advice are essential for anybody buying landed property in rural Hong Kong. Small houses in the new territories are another potential problem spot. You can build a small house in the New Territories without using an architect or an engineer, and you don't have to have the plans approved by the buildings department. That lowers construction costs and it speeds up construction, but it also means quality problems can be a major issue, and it also means that there's lots of unauthorized structures, particularly things like unauthorized floors that have been added onto the top of a building. Older houses in the New Territories very commonly need new wiring and new plumbing, and a wholesale renovation there can easily set you back $3 million or more. There are many other potential issues in the New Territories, ranging from snakes to survey problems, and from local politics to slow internet speed. So it's a good idea to read up on the New Territories in general and get an understanding of the politics and the nature of things there, and to research the specific village that you're moving into, because some of them have got a reputation. If you do a search on the South China Morning Post, you'll find that certain villages come up again and again and again, so you might want to avoid them. So to recap, if you're going to buy in Hong Kong, start with that personal inventory. Figure out where you and your family are at in terms of your relationship with Hong Kong. And then familiarize yourself with the political and economic factors that really drive our high property prices. You'll want to budget accordingly and appropriately, including taxes and fees, and consider what an interest rate rise or a market correction would do to your plans. With a realistic budget, you can decide between a new home or an older one, between a city center location and a rural one. And then you can research your target neighborhood, building, and home to make sure that they're not going to be affected by a big infrastructure project, or worse yet, an unauthorized building works. And finally, remember, if you are going to buy in the New Territories, due diligence there is particularly important to make sure that you don't find yourself buying somebody else's problems. And with that, I would like to open the floor to your questions.